All right, welcome back. What a vibrant discussion with Fareed Zakaria. But don't leave just yet, because we've got some amazing local VIPs right in front of you who will discuss a little bit more in detail about the local perspective and also the global perspective, and touch upon what Fareed talked about. I do want to, before I introduce Rebecca, I do want to thank the National Committee on U.S. China Relations. That's who hosted the event with Fareed Zakaria. I want to thank Overland Partners, where Ben is a partner there as well as the Alamo Asian Chamber of Commerce, and last but not least, U.S. Heartland China Association, as well as all of you for tuning in. I know we have a lot of students, UTSA students and other students from across San Antonio, and also our World Affairs Council members. So thank you again. I think this is going to be, I mean, that discussion was great, but I think this is going to be a lot better, because we'll be able to incorporate some of your questions toward the end. And finally, out of all those entities, I left UTSA for the last because I was going to introduce Rebecca. We have partnered with UTSA to bring Chinatown Hall on an annual basis, and we really appreciate their collaboration with us, and we look forward to our future events as well. Rebecca Pollack, she oversees the International Services Program at UTSA, and she's also a product of UNLV and Arizona State University. But for our purposes, she is our point person to make things happen with UTSA. And I will turn it over to her to introduce the panel. Rebecca?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Arman. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. What a wonderful, wonderful conversation we just heard from with Fareed Zakaria. I do want to say thank you, everybody, on behalf of UTSA and Global Initiatives. And I would like to welcome you again to the Chinatown Hall, the annual event. We're glad to partner again with Armin and your office in the World Affairs Council. What a wonderful partnership we have, and hopefully we can sustain. And we're looking forward to learning even more about the U.S. relations and how they relate to us here in our local community, in our ecosystem. I do want to have a special thank you to our moderator, Dr. Shaw, that is the second here, is agreed to graciously moderate this panel. And of course, the rest of our panelists. I am very looking forward to see where this discussion is going to go. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Yao. Is a professor of kinesiology here in UTSA, and is the former director of the East Asia Institute, and has been a leader for quite a few years in the U.S. and China relations. Dr. Yao, we are so honored that you're joining us today. And I will pass that on to you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thanks for your kind introduction and inviting me back. I also like to thank the teams from both UTSA and the World Affairs Council of San Antonio for your efforts to coordinate this event, for fostering a healthy relationship between the two countries. As the national speaker, Dr. Zakaria indicated, the better relationship is not only better to the two countries, but also better to the whole world. Yes, we are in a critical and a difficult time in terms of the relationship between the two countries. While realizing the difference between the two countries with the joint efforts and the wisdom from both sides, I believe we'll be able to achieve a win-win solution. Having an event like this one tonight, is just for this purpose. Now, please join me in welcoming our tonight's moderator, Dr. Xiaohe Xu. Dr. Xu is an outstanding and well-known scholar in the field of sociology. He is currently a professor in the Department of Sociology at UTSA. Now, Dr. Xu.
Thank you, Professor Yao, for the wonderful introduction. Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to have opportunity to moderate the 15th Annual Chinatown Hall discussion locally in San Antonio. Please allow me to briefly introduce our panelists for this evening's discussion without any particular order. First, we are very pleased to have Mr. Ben Parker with us this evening. He is a senior architect with Overland Partners. He specializes in transformative architecture. I don't pretend I know something about it, okay? And he conducts urban design projects in China. He is a board member and the China Committee Chair with the Alamo Asian American Chamber of Commerce. Next, we are equally pleased to have my UTSA colleague, Dr. Boyka Stefanova with us. She is a professor in the Department of Political Science and Geography at UTSA. Her areas of specialization are global governance, European Union politics, and the issues of democracy in Eastern Europe. Her current work examines evolving relationships between the three powers or three power centers, the European Union, Russia, and China. Last but not least, we are very pleased to have Ms. Lisa Mark join us from China in Shanghai. She's the chief representative and administrative partner at the Shanghai office of Hans and Boone LLP. She serves on the board of advisors of the George H.W. Bush Foundation for U.S. China relations. She's also a board member of the U.S. Heartland China Association and the Greater Dallas Asian American Chamber of Commerce. So please join me in welcoming our outstanding panelists. Now the floor is open for questions. I do want to say something about what we're going to do. So please direct your questions directly to a particular panelist. That would be fine, or directed to the entire panel. Even though we have prepared some questions as icebreakers, but I already seen some questions posted in the Q&A feature. So let me just read the first one quickly to you, see which panelists would like to address this question. The first one by Lisa Epstein. Here's the question. Please address the Uyghur genocide, I would say genocide in Xinjiang in China, and how can Americans use their influence to get China to stop this genocide? So floor is open now. Please, panelists, help us address this question if you may. I know it's a tough one, but let's try. Boyka, you are muted.
Yeah, so if no one is, I'm hoping others will join me. Well, it is an important question. And in fact, the United States has already defined those persecutions as genocide, and many in the international community have done so. If I want to follow in a particular direction, the town hall presentation of Dr. Fareed Zakaria that ended just a minute ago, I would say that it built a lot in the direction of fostering and rebalancing and developing the U.S. China relationship. But indeed, you know, the implicit other direction in which we should be taking that direction, that relationship, is the international community, using the international organizations that the United States helped and was, you know, critical in creating after World War II, and which in the preceding years we a little bit drifted apart from. So work with the allies, work with the United Nations, and broadening that, not just alliances, but broadening the partnerships that the United States has in terms of fostering that culture of rule-based behavior, and also discussing international issues on a broad level. In fact, in recent years, we have seen a scaling back of that effort, and so hence the question, because China's membership on the Human Rights Council of the United Nations has divided somehow preferences for those who are critical and have been critical of China's policies, and others who have actually supported them. So we've had recent letters by ambassadors in 2019. 22 ambassadors wrote about that. So we had a multilateral, in fact, denouncing of China's policies. And then we had 37 other members on that panel that actually supported China's policies and said they've done a remarkable development job in its Western provinces. So that kind of division, in fact, has really diminished the international efforts of the United States. And so working with partners, working on a regional basis with governments in the world's regions is one way to do that. And we don't talk enough about that multilateral strengthening of the multilateral arena. We see doing something in a foreign policy direction bilaterally with China. And I think we need to realize that we have other potential to work more broadly with the international community.
Any additions from Lisa and Ben?
I'm happy to follow up a little bit more specifically, perhaps. Dr. Stefanova pointed out a number of things, including the American government has called this a genocide, as have many other groups. So it's not a debate as far as the U.S. policy making community goes, although of course China would contest that claim. The question specifically asks, how can Americans use their influence to get China to stop this genocide? And while we may feel the need to call it a genocide and call it out, it's much more difficult to figure out how you could use your influence to get China to stop this genocide. And I'm reminded of something that Dr. Fareed Zakaria said about China's actions in India and the South China Sea, and how that had a way of antagonizing their neighbors who may, on other terms, be willing to cooperate. I think we need to recognize that our speaking out as Americans, our organizing to do what we can to oppose this may very well be antagonizing to the average Chinese person, and it's a different question. What should I do about it ethically, and how could we actually get them to stop? I would separate those as two very different questions.
Excellent. Let me move to another question. There is a question by James Delgado. What should companies that have invested so much into China do if things go wrong? I'm assuming this person means if the foreign relationship, collapse between the two countries, what those investors will do. I think Lisa and Ben are in pretty good position to answer this question.
Sure. Let me take that. I think the U.S.-China relationship has been in flux for the last umpteen number of years, right? The most recent period I would characterize as the Trump administration has been very volatile. So it has always been a difficult operating environment for foreign companies entering in China. But you will notice that in the 2021 AmCham Shanghai survey, they put out a survey for the last 50 odd years where they surveyed the US companies operating in China. No survey respondent actually said that they will shut down their China operation and move everything back to the US. Very few respondents actually said that they are considering shifting their supply chain outside of China. So it's quite obvious that there are a lot of investment opportunities that yield a great deal of wealth, shall we say, profits, for anyone that's willing to deal with the difficult operating environment in China. And let me be clear, it has always been a fairly difficult operating environment and a very unfamiliar one. If you're very used to operating in the US, coming to China is sort of like going to Mars. And so, yes, foreign enterprises have invested a great deal in China. They have also reaped a great deal of gain. So on par, I think the business calculation has been beneficial, or else they wouldn't all be still here. If I'm giving advice, which I do on a daily basis as a lawyer, to foreign enterprises operating in China, what they need to be very aware of is not only is the U.S. China relations or foreign China relations changing on a daily basis, the China operating and legal environment is changing on a daily basis. Think of a massive economy of 1.45 billion people that has grown from where there's still starvation back in the 1970s to they've officially eradicated absolute poverty in the 2020s. That is massive change in the course of the last 40, 50 years. And you can't have massive change unless you're changing your society on a daily basis, which means change is the defining word of the Chinese society. So you need to keep a very, very close eye. It's not a recent phenomenon that there is a great deal of change and things are not going so well in foreign US or US-China relationship. Change has been happening in the last 40 years at a very, very rapid pace, whether for the good or for the bad. So I would say that you kind of have to be on your toes a great deal. And if things are going poorly, what I'm seeing while sitting in Shanghai is Chinese regulators, Chinese consumers, and the Chinese society are quite practical. They find a way. So it's the same advice that I would give them or to foreign enterprises. There's always a way to mitigate the risk and maximize your profits. You just have to kind of look deeper.
And any additions, please?
I'm really struck by the phrasing of "go wrong." That is such an interesting choice of words because it could mean so many things. I mean, for me as a business person who's dealing in China day to day, things go wrong all the time. There's always interruptions, complications related to changing regulations, as Lisa pointed out, or other internal affairs with your clients and companies, et cetera. You know, things went wrong for Google in 2010, and they had invested a lot in China. Here in 2021, LinkedIn recently announced that they were shutting down their global website in China. And so obviously they had invested much as well. So in that sense, things are going wrong all the time, and companies are constantly adapting to the new normal. If go wrong is taken to its extreme to mean a Cold War level separation of economy, that's a question I'm not prepared to answer at this time, other than to say that that would have geopolitical implications well beyond just economic implications.
Thank you. Let me go with the order of the questions. So there's another one is quite interesting, but I'm not sure I would be able to address this question. It says, how unpopular is President Xi now among wealthy Chinese? Again, I'm assuming we have some sort of empirical data to go with it, like surveys, especially since the party sponsored sanctions against Jack Ma, that's Alibaba's CEO. This question is by Willis Roberts. So do we have any information? I don't. It's very entertaining and interesting for sure.
I don't have empirical data, but from what I'm seeing, I think President Xi or Chairman Xi is actually very, very popular in China. He is called Grandpa Xi. And you could understand his attraction to the normal Chinese populace. One, under the CPP, for good or ill, wherever your political spectrum is, the Chinese people have in fact gotten better life in the last 20 odd years, right? Obviously, President Xi was not in power for the last 20 odd years, but CPP has. They have come out with the announcement that they've eradicated absolute poverty. And again, for better or ill, you are seeing that the living standard of the Chinese people improve in the last 40 odd years by leaps and bounds. So under that circumstance, under President Xi, you are also seeing a lot of the visible power on the international stage of China being projected more. Now, there's a flip side to this, of course, right? As Dr. Zakaria mentioned, China has not dealt well with its neighbors, all 18 of them, and they are starting to scare them. But on the other hand, in the internal dynamic, the Chinese people are seeing that China is projecting very well on the international stage by being a lot more aggressive. And you are, again, seeing that the Chinese people are flocking to movie theaters to take in movies that emphasize how the Chinese army has won the day in certain Korean wars at great sacrifice to individuals. But in popular culture, you are now seeing the similar war movies that you saw in the US aggrandizing their efforts during World War II. So I would say, just from my personal perspective on the ground in Shanghai, that President Xi is actually very, very popular.
Let me just quickly add something to Lisa's remarks. I think that one of the ways they have done quite well is use banner or in the name of Chinese nationalism, just like other countries in, for example, United States or European countries. So nationalism now is used to justify the party line propaganda or even actions on the international stage. That's my personal observation as well. Let's move on to next one. Will China play a role in the denuclearization of North Korea? I think it's something in this nature. Same questions raised last year. Boyka?
Yeah, I would start the conversation on that. This is an important global issue. Actually, it's not just a regional issue in East Asia. And of course, you know, the question itself contains also the answer. The denuclearization of North Korea is impossible, practically impossible without China. China is a major stakeholder of that regional relationship. And of course, there is perhaps a possibility for President Biden to engage one of the areas, you know, we talk about climate change, but also engaging China and China's support for providing security guarantees, also for moving North Korea outside of that economic enclosure that it has created for itself and sustaining itself by practically being a client state for China, depending entirely for its economic survival on China. So there is an opportunity there. It's a difficult one because a number of US presidents have worked on the North Korea situation, but have failed so far regarding on the format they have used. And of course, they have tried to always include China, but it's in China's interest to see denuclearization, because a predictable North Korea, Lisa, you may want to add something on that. A predictable North Korea, a North Korea that can be included in China's, even supply chains, is a good increasing and a good and increasing opening for China, and also a way to scale back some U.S. Presence in that area. So definitely, I would say a key stakeholder in North Korea, but clearly a very difficult approach to engage China in that area. And the situation around Taiwan certainly not helping, but definitely should be kept outside. Bring in once again Russia, because they also have security guarantees for North Korea. They have a security, so not expecting those security arrangements to be removed, but actually renewing them with more security guarantees on behalf of the United States is the way forward. But that's just another international crisis following on what's unfolding, and certainly a challenge for the Biden presidency.
Thank you. Armin, Rosa, do you have any further comments on this one? Okay. Lisa and Ben, any additions?
I don't have any comments, Dr. Xu. Thank you.
I might just add, with the caveat that this is pure personal speculation on my part, but as all nations, China will do what is in China's interest. So obviously, stability maintenance is very important for China, and I think a fair question to ask is a denuclearized Korea supporting China's interests more than a nuclearized one? And are the payoffs of either one of those worth it? By that, I mean, a denuclearized Korea would be a huge win for America. It might be a small win for China. Is that a win that China wants to give us, to be rather blunt about it?
Very good. I don't think so, but we'll see how it plays out. It has been outstanding issues between China and the United States. I think North Korea can be a sort of a, I'm not going to say a key player, but some sort of a player we definitely should not be ignored. But I don't know. I think China has a very difficult position on this one. Boyka is right. Russia should get involved, because North Korea probably has better relationship from my personal perspective with Russia than with China. Let's turn to another one. This is a slightly longer one. I think the whole panel probably will have better ideas about what we should do. For all of the panelists, okay, given that the Biden administration has continued with many, if not most, of the Trump administration's China policies, what short-term and the long-term opportunities exist to improve China-US relations? Very good question. So please take it away. It's a very macro, it's broad, but see if you can break down into some small pieces. Ben, Lisa, Boyka, anything you want to address this one?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. Look, this is a very broad question. I think, or I'll refer to something where I heard a prior ambassador to China say, and I think it's very, very astute and true. The best way of making the U.S.-China relations improve is to strengthen U.S. itself. You want to negotiate from a position of strength. You want to demonstrate to the world that the U.S. government is working It's working to serve its people. It's working to serve the rest of the world. Now, that's not a direct quote, but that's the idea. I think the whole community in the US, normal people, could also work to improve the US relations. More engagement, more understanding of both the US people to the Chinese people, which is part of what we're doing right now. That improves the relations because it scares a lot less people. I would also challenge the premise of the question, because the Biden administration just came into power this year, 2021, if I'm not completely mistaken. They have had a lot of crises to deal with. So my regard of the Biden administration's China policy is they are still trying to sort it out whilst dealing with a lot of other crises. And China, and when you're not actively engaged in dealing with China, because that's not the fire that you're dealing with right now, you tend to want to take a more thought out approach, and that takes time. I am now observing that the US policy is starting to come together, starting to have more conversations with the Chinese counterparties. And so I would say that it's not that the Biden administration has decided to continue with many, if not most, of the Trump administration's policy. They haven't changed it yet. So whether they will change it, I think, is something to be looked forward to. And I think they are starting to put some building blocks in place to potentially have a better relationship. So the USTR ambassador Tsai is having more conversations. The kind of Jake Sullivan, the foreign policy advisor, is having more conversations. You are seeing the military engage more between China's military and the US military. Obviously, the Alaska talks did not go over so well, but the State Department is having more conversations with China. And you are hearing that the rhetoric from the Trump administration, where you're accusing China of shall we say, engineering and introducing the pandemic to the rest of the world, is backing off. But again, my point is, I think the US policy towards China is slowly coming together. They haven't changed it yet.
Okay, if I may add, I couldn't agree more with, of course, adding something. Definitely, we see a break with the transactionalist nature of President Trump's foreign policy. So if some of the measures and the basic measures and the basic policy instruments applied to China are still in place, their purpose and their rationale is different. Also because President Biden ran on a foreign policy that is for the American middle class, very broadly defined, many strata of American society, including a policy for the working class, as we heard during the town hall presentation of Fareed Zakaria. So in a way, America's foreign policy will be changing because it is moving away from that transactionalist approach. It's not a matter of how much soybean is being shipped to China, whether China is agreeing to particular quantities within a year. It's a much more holistic approach of keeping China engaged, of keeping it within the rule-based behavior of international order. So the United States, rather than being transactionalist towards China, is turning to see what kind of reform is needed, for example, in the World Trade Organization. But most of these measures are long-term. Reform is something that is very future-oriented. Many of the seeds are being planted now. And the question referred to short-term and long-term. So all these reforms, all these engagements are likely to be pursued during the course of the Biden presidency. But short-term, of course, the thing that comes to mind, this is climate change. And we have at the end of this month, the COP26 opening in Glasgow, where we can see the United States that has just returned to the Paris Agreement to take a very proactive role to make commitments from the UN General Assembly. China vowed that it's stopping exporting coal-fired plants already in its international projects. Unfortunately, the energy crisis that has hit many parts of the world, so it's practically global, made China resort to the use of coal in its everyday energy, in securing its everyday energy balance, which is a major step backward. But we are hearing the long-term trends of actually solar power being already very efficient, very competitive in China. So by the mid-century, it will generate through such renewable sources almost half of its electricity, and that must be, you know, a pointer of where China's going. So certainly keeping engaged while resolving these competition issues, because the solar industry of the United States practically has been driven out, but not just here, anywhere it started, it moved practically to China. But engaging China on climate change commitment, talking to the Chinese within international fora, and this is a major one, that's actually a huge step forward, I think, and it's a short-term, and it will be a short-term gain for the United States, because there have been past occasions in 2009, in 2014, when practically an agreement with China during those multilateral formats have been instrumental in moving the climate agenda forward. The commitments that President Obama at the time was able to negotiate with China practically saved a number of climate-related deals. So this is what I see in short-term perspective, while keeping all these issues as we suggested within a multilateral format, and that is the Uyghur situation, pressing China on its regional behavior, and also keeping dialogue in bilateral relations.
All right, let's turn to another question. I think it's very important for Chinese American communities around the country. The coronavirus crisis has unleashed a wave of anti-Asian racism around the world, drawing renewed attention to issues of bias, immigration, and the place of Asian Americans in society. Rhetoric such as China virus, Kung flu has only exacerbated the negative trends. What are strategies for addressing incidents of racism in our communities? Excellent question.
That is an excellent question. Thank you, Rebecca, for asking. And I would just like to point to the actions of our Asian American community here in San Antonio when this type of horrible racism has come very close to home. It's an honor serving on the Alamo Asian American Chamber of Commerce with many very active, both in the business world, but also from a community perspective, fellow business people, Asian Americans, many Chinese Americans. In March of this year, there was a hate crime committed against a noodle restaurant here in town. And the Asian American community spoke out aggressively and showed up insistently, I should say, saying that it wasn't right, asking for accountability, getting participation from the police department, the mayor, etc., to stop Asian hate was the slogan. And to me, that in itself is extremely effective, to speak out when something happens and to speak out as a group, not only the group that's being discriminated against in question, but with broad allies, again, at the police department, of other ethnicities and backgrounds, from all over the community, to say that this is not right. To me, I'm incredibly moved to participate in things such as that. And that is one very strong way, I think, that we can address it. Obviously, it doesn't solve the problem or change the past, but to me, it's at least one effective measure.
Thank you. And there's another one. Although US companies doing business in China say they are not moving, with effects of a pandemic over time, take the US into a more protectionist stance, and the US companies take supply sourcing elsewhere. Again, this is a very interesting question. Lisa?
If you look at the supply chain shifts, before the pandemic, the supply chain has in fact slowly been shifting away from China to nearshoring Mexico or Southeast Asia. And this is very natural. As Dr. Zakaria says, when an economy increases in wealth and development, it reduces in manufacturing and increases in service jobs. Put another way, it gets more expensive to manufacture in that economy because rents go up, salaries for manufacturers go up. And so, shall we say from 2013 to about 2019, if you look at the trend line for supply chain coming from China, it is actually trending down. But in the COVID situation, in the pandemic situation, what we're seeing is a lot of the supply chain has moved back to China for two reasons. Reason number one, China went into a very, very strict lockdown back in early 2020 when they had the COVID situation. They literally blocked off the whole city of Wuhan. Nobody gets out, nobody comes in, and individuals were told, you stay home and you get a slip of paper for one member of your family to go out and buy food every 2 days. Using that level of strict control, they were able to shut down the city, clear out the COVID, and essentially open back up the city. I think it's 74 or 78 days after they locked it down. Now, I don't think that would happen in the US, but they achieved it in China at quite a bit of cost to the person. Individual rights were trampled on, I would say. Individual rights as envisioned in the US, right? The Chinese don't see it that way. But because they had the strict lockdown, they were able to keep a zero COVID policy in place up to even now. They didn't have COVID within China, which means their factories were operational. They had no lockdowns. They had no shelter in place. They just produced, normally speaking. This in an era when the rest of the world, think Thailand, think Vietnam, think Myanmar, think Mexico, had massive COVID issues where people were dying and the society as a whole were not operating 100%. So if you wanted something and you needed it guaranteed, manufactured, and delivered, China's probably your best choice. They had no COVID issue. Second reason, China, because of its manufacturing base and the 20 odd years of being the premier operation manufacturing base of the rest of the world, they were the kind of workshop of the rest of the world. They had built and invested in a massive infrastructure system. They had superhighways. They had ports that were operational at a volume that very few other ports in the rest of the world could outpace. Their transportation infrastructure was premier in the rest of the world. So when companies that were manufacturing in China tried to shift their supply chain to Southeast Asia, what they found was they could build the factories, no problem. That's the normal investment. You sort of like find a piece of land, you build the infrastructure, you build the factory, and you find the people to man your factory. But once you produced all your products, you still have to find a way to get your products from your factory to the closest port. And the port needs to be able to handle the load of shipments. And what most manufacturers found in Southeast Asia was the infrastructure was not catching up, particularly during the COVID era. So what happened was from 2019, there were actually a lot of shifting back of manufacturer that got offshored from China back into China. One major example was Foxconn was requested by Apple to shift some of their manufacturing out of China. I believe they went to Vietnam. They have since closed down the Vietnam plant and shifted everything back to China because it wasn't working so well, right? So I would say that for now, until the world gets a handle on COVID, you are going to see a lot of manufacturing still being conducted in China, regardless of the per diem cost. We are on the ground in Shanghai seeing a lot of kind of supply chain design shift from balkanization of the supply chain, which means you're manufacturing your Chinese goods for the Chinese market within China and everything else for the Western world being manufactured somewhere else. They are now shifting back to the old way of manufacturing in China, but potentially with a +1 or +2. As in, China's still your major manufacturing base, but you are then setting up a backup plan so that if China goes down, you still have a sort of backup option where you could try to manufacturing your stuff either in one Southeast Asia country or two.
Then could you provide some local either evidence or perspective in terms of dealing with China? For example, the business trade between San Antonio and other places in China, including your own practice.
Sure, I don't have all that much perspective on the manufacturing side, but in terms of professional services, it's certainly something we are evaluating constantly. Many professional services firms have offices in China. Obviously, the investment in such a thing is more substantial, and so you don't just decide one day that you're moving and pack up and go. Other professional services firms don't have locations in China. Overland is an example, but have clients there, take trips there, that kind of thing. And it's always been a small portion of our business model, the international work and the China work specifically. And there's an overlap between what Lisa was saying about sort of the China +1 and the way I think professional services operate. And it's perhaps most succinctly summarized in don't put all your eggs in one basket. So everyone wants to still be in China, but they also want to hedge against the risks of anything disruptive.
I think these all the questions I have seen so far. Again, audience, you have something urgent or burning, please ask. Otherwise, I'm gonna. Okay, go ahead.
If I can say something about in that, just to follow up on what my colleagues have suggested, to follow up on that importance of infrastructure question. Apparently that decoupling that we're almost used to talking about since the pandemic struck is a process that is still being considered with, you know, sometimes happening, sometimes not. China itself, let's point out, has introduced that kind of thinking of decoupling from dependence on this strategy of export-led growth. They want to emphasize this dual circulation strategy where they also build on domestic demand, and then they built another circuit that is based on global supply chains. Unfortunately, the pandemic has prevented, I think, those strategies from taking place in a definitive way. But just very recently, the G7, I think, approved this kind of conceptual innovation put forward by the Biden administration to build back better world, which is creating infrastructure in a way somehow replicating that logic of the Belt and Road Initiative that we haven't mentioned this evening, interestingly, in places such as Africa, in Latin America. So this B3 World initiative is going to catch up, and that is a much more development and infrastructure oriented, building those alternatives to this global dependence upon supply chains that are focused and based out of China. So there is a lot in terms of reform of that concept of globalization that is based on China and relies on China exclusively, and which is very much what the international trade in the era of globalization should look like, being much more flexible, being going back to create opportunities for more, and not that disparity that globalization has actually aggravated for the world.
Thank you. Ben, I'm going to ask Ben and Lisa for particular questions, but Armin, I know our time is up. I just want to ask a quick question. What will happen to the trade war between U.S. China? Do you anticipate any changes, particularly how tariff structure? Give us a quick observation. I'm just curious. I'm terribly curious about this issue.
On the trade war, I think as Fareed had mentioned, it is politically very difficult at this point to back off what they have positioned. I think the phase 1 trade deal has not been fulfilled, and essentially China and US at the political scale is talking about whether they will fulfill the phase 1 trade deal. I think the world has priced in the tariffs because the tariffs has been existing for a while now. It is not, my personal observation is it's not good for anyone because the tariffs both impose a cost on the US consumer and also it's not working. But whether there will be enough of a political will to take them all off and find a different way to exert or negotiate on the issues that are the genesis of the trade war, I don't know. My anticipation is the tariffs will stay.
Ben and Boyka, quick additions, yes or no?
I, in general, completely agree with Lisa. I think short of a larger disruption in the relationship, the tariffs are probably here. If I had to take my best guess, there was a question about policies and consistency in policy between Trump and Biden. Policy is one part of a diplomatic relationship, but there are other parts, including the personalities of the leaders, and the volatility on the American side has certainly come way down with the new election. And so, as Lisa also said, things haven't changed yet. I think that's representative that there's a certain amount of entrenchment, and unless there's a strong reason or a larger disruption to disrupt the small amount of status quo that we have right now, we won't really rock that boat.
Yeah, and if I may add, they will, because they are constantly being, recalculated, and they are based on what the market is showing, and the market is showing that, of course, the levels under the existing trade regime under the WTO warrants and anticipates the tariffs. And as Lisa suggested, they are already priced in, but also the long-term view, we shouldn't forget it, the multilateral, the international trading system route. The WTO needs a reform, and so while keeping the tariffs, I think that there are more openings to start the reform of the dispute settlement mechanism, of the trade policy reviews. And let's not forget that China has not been acknowledged by the United States and also the European Union as an open market economy. So as long as the non-market practices have been documented under the WTO, of course, that kind of bilateral tariff-based trade relationship will stay to enable more openings for reform on a multilateral basis within the WTO.
Thank you very much, Armin. Please take away. I think we are basically out of time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Well, Rebecca, I think we've done another year here with our collaboration with UTSA and the Global Studies program and department, and also thanks to Rosa Virginia, who is also a colleague of Rebecca's, and also my colleague Samantha Scory, who's working behind the scenes. So thanks to UTSA for being a partner in this. I first want to appreciate Lisa Mark. She is live from Shanghai, has gotten up early, and for our prep meeting, she stayed up late. So thank you so much for joining us, not only because of your expertise, but also because of the time difference. Ben Parker with Overland and the Alamo Asian Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Ben, for always willing to step up. To Dr. Stefanova, Dr. Yao, Dr. Chu, thank you. Thank you for moderating. Appreciate that so much. We also want to thank the U.S. Heartland China Association, and of course, all of you for tuning in, and all the students who have tuned in to listen as well, and the World Affairs Council members. Before we go, next week today, we have an in-person program about the Holocaust, and we will be live from the Jewish Community Center, and we'll be zooming in someone from the education department at Auschwitz, and we'll be talking about the program there. You could click on the link for more info about that. It's limited seating. We also have international trivia coming up. That's also on the event page. It's called World Quest, so be sure to tune in for that. Want to thank all of you for sticking with us for the last 2 hours. Really appreciate your time and your expertise and your skill set. Dr. Xu, when you do it so well, we're going to keep asking you to do it again. So we'll see you all next year for Chinatown Hall, but we'll see you soon at the World Affairs Council. You all have a great night.
We'll be happy to do it again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.